Hello, welcome back to my channel. This is episode 3 of Diddy's Guides to GregTech New Horizons Bees. In this episode, we'll talk about my preferred path of bee breeding, what I think you should look out for, the bees you should go for first in order to help your run progress. We'll look at starting the steps to get the alveary, we'll look at getting the Apiarist suit, and we'll talk about the Acclimitiser in the end. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the path of bees that I recommend you follow when starting out your bee breeding guide. After you have gotten some of the original base bees from the hives around the world, you're going to start off your path by breeding your first common, which we will get to today. Then you're going to head into your cultivated, and then you'll split off into two lines, your noble and your diligent. I suggest that you rush immediately for the alveary, as that's going to help you with not only mutating bees in the future, as well as passiving them for the highest rate and yield gains until you get the industrial apiary and mega apiary. And to do that, you're going to have to get two different types of bees in these first two rows. The first is the Industrious bee, which produces this pollen cluster. The pollen cluster is a vital ingredient in the scented paneling, of which you need 216 of to get your first 27 alveary blocks. Along with that is also the as well as the royal jelly, my apologies, which comes from the Imperial bee, which you can also see is the one right below this. So when you start off your bee breeding guide, you're going to start with the commons. You'll go down this route. Once you get to the Industrious and once you get to the Imperial, you should immediately passive them in the apiary in one of the setups I showed you in the previous episodes. And that way you can start gaining the materials for royal jelly and pollen clusters, so you can get the alveary in the near future. Don't worry about the stats on the bees itself. You just want to get them started. We'll worry about getting better stats on the bees later so we can up the production. But at the beginning, these are the two most important bees that you need to go for. Now, before we get into breeding, I want to talk about the first bees that you should go for as soon as you get the Industrious and Imperial passive, so you can start working towards your alveary. While these 5 bees are part of the quest book, I think they're important to start out with because the materials that they produce are going to be helpful in the long run. Now, if you look at the quest book, you'll see that you can make a clay bee from Industrious and Diligent. You'll just need a damp biome to do that. We'll get into that later. But once you make that, you can make the tin bee, the copper, the iron, the nickel, and the zinc. Now, the tin, copper, and iron bees all produce combs, which you can centrifuge for their dust variants. And when you're in MV and HV starting out, it's a nice passive resource and income to have when you don't have to go out mining or place down a miner somewhere in the world over a vein. And if you leave it chunk loaded in an area of your base, or you're just around it while you're working on other machines or other parts of GregTech or other mods, then this will be a steady income that can definitely boost your production in the early game when you say need just a couple more tin ingots here and there and a couple more copper ingots. And this is definitely a good resource to passive in the early game. Now, the nickel and zinc bees both produce combs, respectively nickel comb and the zinc comb, and the zinc bee also produces a gallium comb, which you can use later down the line in HVEV for gallium arsenide crystals and other things in GregTech. The nickel bee also produces platinum combs, which you can help supplement your plat line later on down the line. Those bees and combs specifically require hydrochloric acid in a large chemical or in a chemical reactor and a large chemical reactor, respectively, to process. But when you have the ability to make hydrochloric acid and you have the extra power to put in a chemical reactor, that extra nickel, that extra zinc, that extra gallium is definitely going to be helpful in the long run. And if you take a look at the nickel bee, you can also see that this platinum comb produces gives you 1 platinum nugget when you use the comb and hydrofluoric acid in the chemical reactor. Platinum nuggets, obviously, you can compress into ingots and then the blocks, and that is a good way to get early platinum if you don't want to do the full plat line or go out and try to find other ways to get platinum. So I would recommend that after you get your Industrious and Imperial bees done, you first go breeding into your clay, your tin, and then you get your tin, copper, iron, zinc, and nickel, and then you can move on to some other parts of the quest book. The next bee that I recommend you go for after you get the initial tin, copper, iron, zinc, and nickel bees is actually the Redstone bee. The Redstone bee is very useful as it unlocks a few bees that you will need for progression in GregTech. And while bee breeding obviously is a side quest of GTNH and is not required for progression, the unlocks that you can get from some of these bees are well worth it to help supplement your progress. The Redstone bee specifically helps unlock the Firestone bee. The Firestone bee can unlock the Explosive bee, and the Explosive bee is very, very important because it gives you Industrial TNT, which you can use for all of your space crafts, like crafting the rocket, crafting other things, and as well as used in the implosion compressor, because you'll use it quite a bit. So that's why I recommend going for the Redstone bee next, as then you can breed into the Explosive bee and you can passively produce Industrial TNT without having to go through the complicated chemical reactor line and make toluene and make nitration mixer, and you can just get it straight from a bee. However, if you're going to go for the Redstone bee, which requires you to go through the hell bees, the ones you find in the nether, I recommend doing two things first. The first is gaining access to the nether roof. The nether roof, which you can do very easily in 1.7.10, there are holes caused by just GTNH generation, as well as there's other tricks using the ladder plus an ender pearl, like you would in vanilla. The nether roof is very useful because it's a flat surface, you can build on it, and mobs do not spawn, so you won't have to deal with hellhounds and fire bats and piglins and gas or whatever else can kill you in the nether. You can just have a flat surface to work with, and it'd be a lot easier to breed and work with bees while you were up there. The second thing I recommend is that you need to get the Apiarist suit. There are many bees in GregTech New Horizons, such as the coal bee, the uranium bee, and other bees down the line, which you'll experience, which will kill you. And some of those are the nether bees. They'll take heart damage if you are not wearing an Apiarist suit. Now, you can tank the damage if you're wearing good armor or you have enough hearts because you ate a lot of food, but I would recommend that you just get the Apiarist suit, get it out of the way, and then you can wear it when you're breeding bees and never have to worry about any adverse effects that the bees can have on you. To get the Apiarist suit, you're going to want to find a tropical rainforest. You're going to want to find the tropical hives, which can be found in the rainforest. You're going to break that with a scoop, and you're going to get a tropical princess and a tropical drone. You're then going to put the tropical princess and a drone in the apiary and passive it to get silky combs. Now, if you look at this tropical bee, which I just put in here so I could start the process, you can see that it's warm and damp. Now, we talked about climate and humidity in the last episode, and we talked about the up one and the down one and how that is, and we'll get into that later in this episode. But you can also see the effect poison here. So if you're not wearing the APR suit, this will poison you, but you need this to make silky combs, which then gives you silky propolis, which gives you silk wisp, which then you turn with water into woven silk, and then you can make the Apiarist suit. Once you get this, the poison damage will not affect you. So you're going to want to find a tropical rainforest, passive this bee, and then chunk load it or just move far away. You're going to get poisoned a little bit as you just wait for the silk that you need to make the Apiarist suit, but it's well worth it in the end, as once you get the Apiarist suit, you won't get poisoned anymore. If it's not fast enough, you're just going to have to find some more tropical bees and do some more passiving, just put another apiary down or whatnot. Now, let me tell you something about breeding bees. This is one of the first steps you'll learn. You can see that in this apiary, this temperature is actually hot damp. So now, if you remember, the bee wants warm damp. However, in the temperature, it says warm up 1. If you go warm up 1, now you're in hot. Damp is the highest. Damp up 1 is still damp. Damp below, or down 1 would be, down 1 or 2 would be normal, and then going down would be arid. So warm up 1, meaning it can breed and it can work in the hot temperature, is how you're able to do this in this tropical rainforest. Now, the tropical rainforest that you find may just be warm damp, which is great, but for me in this world, this one's hot damp. But because this bee and its base stats allows it to work in the hot temperature, I can just put it in here. Let me grab this out of here. I can just put it in here, and it'll just run, and over time it'll gain the silky combs, which then I can use for the Apiarist suit. The other early game useful bee that I recommend you get immediately and start passiving is actually the refined bee. Now, this line you can actually get from after you get the Industrious and the Imperial bee, as it only requires 2 of the basic bees, the first bees that you breed, my apologies, to breed into. You get the ancient, and then you can find an ocean bee out in the ocean, or you can get it from the quest, and then you can breed into primeval, oily, distilled, and then refined. Now, the refined bee is very, very useful because it produces two combs. The oily combs, which then you can centrifuge into oil propolis, which just extracts into oil. And then more importantly, the petroleum combs, my apologies, which straight up extracts into fuel or diesel. This is very, very useful for the early game. If you have not set up benzene power or you're not running on steam power, diesel power can power your base in MV and HV fairly well. And if you stack multiple Bs or you add this, petroleum propolis as refined B into your network of power that you already have, then the diesel will just help in the future. In this current world, we set up the diesel Bs. I set up the diesel Bs to run my B dimension that you see here in front of me or behind me passively, and to run all my B equipment just based on B powering itself. These 14 alvearies plus an additional 7 over there were all running refined Bs, which just gave a lot of diesel combs to then power all the apiaries over and over again, as well as supplement power to the base as we use diesel to power auxiliary setups and other things that we needed. Outside of the bees I just mentioned, there are actually many bees that are not mentioned in the quest book that you should go for when you can and when getting the material makes sense. 2 bees that are not in the quest book are the energy bee and the lapitron bee. The lapitron bee being here, which actually is bred using the energy bee and a lapis bee, which is in the quest book. The lapitron bee produces both lapitron and energy comb, and the lapitron comb gives you 1-to-1 lapitron dust, which you will use for lapitron crystals, and more importantly to make your lapitronic supercapacitor, which is a large energy bank to store all your power. This bee should really be in the quest book, but it isn't, and I feel that's prudent that I mention it because you should know that in the future you can get this bee and it will really, really help out, especially if you have many of them producing lapitron dust for you. Now, getting the lapitron bee is not easy. It will require a trip into Witchery so you can get the biome of shifting, the potion of shifting biomes, and you'll have to go to the moon to get the bee bred, but we'll get to that when we get there. But it's just something you should look out on the radar. And of course, the energy comb, which you get from Lapitron, and the energy which you need to breed in Lapitron, just produces the Energium dust for you, which when mixed with Lapis also gives you Lapitron dust, but Energium dust is also useful for many other things. The other other 2 bees not mentioned that I think are also prudent are 1 Infinity Catalyst, which then also breeds into Infinity Bee. Those bees are very helpful in the late game to give you Infinity Catalyst, and then the Infinity Comb helps in your Plasma Forge to get Molten Infinity. And then the Xenon Bee. The Xenon Bee is very, very important because xenon is one of the best materials to smelt stuff with in the EBF outside of Oganescent, which you cannot get until you are very late game. So just keep track. There are many bees that are not in the quest book that you should go through, and you can read and you can find them out if you just start going through bee chains and looking and say, hey, I have this material, can I make a different material, or does this material exist from bees? And you can just kind of go through that and you're thinking, you're like, okay, now I need this bee, or when can I get this bee, things like that. So just be on the lookout. The Xenon bee, however, and I'll tell you this now, you need to be careful when you hover over, when you click on the Xenon bee and you see the Xenon Princess, hold shift for details, read the line at the bottom. Jubilance will only be produced in the Mega Apiary. So if you are breeding and you're in EV and IV, when you can actually get the Xenon bee because it just requires Krypton bees and the Twilight Forest bees, you cannot use this bee unless you have a Mega Apiary. So you cannot use it until UV. However, when you are in UV, it's going to become extremely useful. But just read the jubilance on all the bees that you breed, so it tells you what it needs for the bee to produce its combs. So this one can only produce in a Mega Apiary. A lot of them will say needs preferred climate. That just means it needs to be in an icy normal for it to produce its combs that it wants. However, there are some that specifically have a different jubilance, will only be produced in Mega Apiary or whatnot, and that is what you need to look out for when you start searching through these bee trees and the bee breeding. and the bees that you want to breed into, so you can see, hey, can I even make this bee, and if I can, is it even possible for me to passive it and get the resources out of it. Additionally, the space bees, which are mentioned in the quest book as after you get the original space bee, it tells you can find bees from other planets, are very, very useful in helping you produce materials passively over time that you can actually get from, if you were to put down a miner on those planets. Take, for instance, this Vega bee drone. This Vega bee produces a Vega bee stone dust. The Vega bee, when centrifuged, produces europium dust. Now, it's only a 15% chance, and it takes a while at LUV power in a centrifuge. However, if you passive the Vega bee drone and you just let it run and just have a dedicated centrifuge running the Vega bee stone dust, over time you will start gaining europium dust, gaining awakened dracanium, Nequadria oxide mixture, which you can supplement into your knack line, and you can get europium dust for free basically, and you would not have to use a fusion reactor to fuse two elements together to get the molten europium that you would have to do for progression anyway. So be on the lookout for space bees, as there's many of them for almost every single planet you can go to. You can get a bee of that type, and each of them produce something interesting or materials that you might want to passive, and you just have to set up the bee in an alveary or in your industrial apiary or mega apiary, wherever you are at, and just run them passively in a centrifuge, and over time you will start gaining some materials that you would have to otherwise mine for or use fusion reactors for when you're on that planet. Now, there are very many bees that I did not mention in the last few segments, like the Kevlar bee or the Jägermeister bee, both of which are very interesting and can definitely help you when you are doing your progression through the GregTech tiers or other mods. But this gives you the opportunity to look through the bees available and the breeding trees and charts and figure out the path that works best for you. Each player and run will be different. I cannot stress that enough. You may find yourself needing a specific resource at any given time more than others, and even some of the ones that I mentioned. In that instance, you should take the time to detour to get that bee that can produce the resource for you, and then go back to whatever you're doing, whether it's progression in GregTech or finishing quests or working on power. And if you are crazy enough, like I am, and I'm still continuing to work on, you can do the exclusive challenge of acquiring every bee in the pack, of which there are 430 or something, some odd of them. But you should go and look at the bees that are available in this pack and see which ones you want, which ones you need to passive, so you can get resources that you covet, because they are very, very useful to help supplement your mining, your meteor ritual from blood magic, the void miners, the Eye of Harmony in the end game. Bees are very, very challenging, but they are very, very fun once you realize how overpowered you can get when you are running thousands of bees at a time in a mega apiary, and alternatively when you are just running 40, 50 bees in multiple alvearies spread out, just producing you passive resources that help you in the long run. Now let's talk about what happens when you have a bee that you are breeding, but you're not in the right biome for it to properly start its bee tick cycle. As you can see, I have this modest queen where it's hot and arid for the temperature and humidity. It's got both one on the hot, but arid is down one. If I put it in here, you'll see that we get two things on the left side of the apiary. It says it's too humid and it's too cold. That means that this is not the correct biome to breed this bee in, or passive the bee for that matter. Now there are two options that you can use to get around this. The first option, and this is if you're on a server or if you have a large file, in your single player world that you've already, large area you've already explored, you can just travel to different biomes that have the requirements, and you can use a biome locator, a nature's compass, to find those biomes around you, and you could just travel and then set up an apiary there and breed the bee in that location. If you have multiple homes enabled like I did on the server, that's a very easy fix. You can just /home and go to wherever different biomes that you needed, and it works. It's very easy to do it that way. That way you don't have to mess with anything. You don't have to mess with any other anything within the bees ecosystem to just go and breed the bees. However, the other way that you can do it is by using the Acclimitiser. Now, the Acclimitiser is a bee that, you know, like it says, makes bees more comfortable. It's an item from the genetics mod where you can power it using RF. Do not use GregTech EU. It doesn't really work. You need to hook it up to a capacitor and then use an RF conduit, and this will allow your bees to get those traits into them so they can breed and they can be passive in any environment. That's what I was talking about in the previous episode with the climate and the modifiers next to both the temperature and the humidity, whether it's up 5, down 5, up 3, down 3, or even both. Now, as you can see on the side here in the quest book, in the how to bee tab, it's actually this first one down here. It tells you that if you give it a snowball, you get more cold tolerance. You give it lava, you get more heat tolerance. Sand, you get more dry tolerance. Water, you get more wet tolerance. Anyways, this and to break it down, this water makes it more damp, sand makes it more arid, lava makes it more hot, snow obviously makes it more cold. However, this is not what I would recommend to use. Instead of snowballs, I would use ice, as it gives a better effect. And if you click on the Acclimitiser, which isn't actually that hard to make, it's just MV components. The integrated processor requires stainless steel and HV circuits, but if you're in HV, so you need to be able to get to HV, but it shouldn't be that hard, especially if you are in early game. And then if you click on the Acclimitiser, you can actually see the effects that each item gives. I would recommend ice because it gives a temperature effect of minus 0.75 rather than a snowball gives minus 0.15. And I would use blaze rods instead of lava buckets because the lava bucket actually gets consumed. The bucket goes into the bee itself and you don't get the bucket back. So I would recommend using blaze rods as they give the same effect, but it's a lot easier to handle blaze rods, especially in the early game where you can't hold lava buckets because it'll hurt you. And then you can just obviously you start to have a mob farm to get a lot more blaze rods is a lot easier than pumping lava. The other thing I would also say is don't use water buckets, use water capsules. As you can see here, any of the capsules from all the beeswax that you're going to get from centrifuge and combs, you can put them in an extruder. It only needs to be LV with a cell mold. You get a wax capsule, and you can actually put it into a fluid tank like I have, hook it up to water, and you can just pump in the capsule and it'll become a water capsule. And you can just use those because one, they stack 116, and as well as it doesn't consume the bucket. Now, if you are more advanced and have access to world accelerators, because acclimatizers can be world accelerated, you can actually set up a system I have here where each one starts with the blaze rod for more heat, then ice for less for the cold, because I want to get both 5 on both the climate and the humidity as well, because that will make it so I can breed and passive the bee in any biome. Now remember, as the quest book says, and as I have told you, if the bee is not in its preferred climate, it will not produce the special production. So only do this for a passive bee if you know that you're not going to need the special production, like the titanium bee, as I showed in the last episode, where the titanium comb is a regular production, so you can be put anywhere. Anyway, the way that this one works is if I take out, so there's actually a metal drone here. If I take out this modest queen and I put it in here, it'll go in here, and as you can see, it'll slowly over time take the blaze rod and insert it, and it'll start taking things. Now if I turn this on, it'll actually speed this up to go a lot faster. As you can see now, it's both 3 as it's getting the heat, and when it's done, when it actually gets both 5, it'll actually be sent to the right slot at the end. Now when it's done, and that's what happens if it gets up 5, down 5, both 5. When it's finished, it'll actually go to the end. Now be warned, as you can see here, this can consume a lot of resources. I've already consumed like 3 or 4 stacks of blaze rods, and it's continue going. My apologies. The one I've seen the worst is actually sand. I've seen a bee take 15 stacks of sand and still not move down one. So it can be very, very costly to use the Acclimitiser, so be careful. Now I have it set up so that if I just extract it with a blacklist so it doesn't send the blaze rod, so once it's done it'll go into this and it'll get the ice, and when it's done with that it'll actually send it again without sending the ice, or else the ice would just get exported into this one. This one goes to the sand, same thing. It's got a filter to not send the sand. And then here's the water capsules at the end, where I don't send those either, and then at the end it'll come here. So if I were to leave this running, eventually at some point, hopefully this bee will actually get the traits. Now if you are thinking that, wow, this is taking way too much and I don't want to spend this many resources, you can always take it out and put it in the next one, and it should then, you know, go through the rest of the line if you set it up this way. But if you only have one acclimatizer and you're doing it manually, just make sure that you are keeping track of how many resources you are using. See, now this is also taking so much ice, so I'm not going to put it in there anymore. I'm going to put it in here, and we'll see if it takes more sand. So now it just went to down 2, down 3, down 4, like down 5. Now it's done. Now it goes over here, and it gets sent back here because now it's both 5. It consumed all the water already. So the bees, so this setup works if you want to just automate them. You'll have to use export buses, which can cause a little TPS, and you'll have to have set up an AE and have the resources for it. But if you're doing it one by one, it's actually not that bad. I'm just going to leave it in here to see how many blaze rods it actually takes. Look, it went up to both 4 and both 5. So at some point it should go in here and it can be sent to the next one. But this is also something else you should keep track of. Even though it says both 5, it'll still consume it. And I'm not sure if that's a bug or why this happens, but it just continues to do so. If we take this out and actually look at it in the modest queen in here in the second thing, you can see it's both 5 up top. So I'm not sure why it continues to take it, but at least we know that from now it's just going to keep going. And we'll see how long it takes. If I make sure, let me just check to see how many blaze rods I have. 15 million. Well, if I actually use 15 million, then we might have a problem. Anyway, so this is how you can set up the acclimatizer to then put the bee in any biome that it is. Now, if I were to actually take this out and we turn this off and I put this bee in here, it actually, the two things on the side will go away, and now I can actually use this bee in the bee cycle in this normal biome. Okay, now let's take a deep breath and let's actually get into some bee breeding. I know this is a thing that a lot of you have been waiting for, and I know it's taken a long time through 2 episodes and pretty much the entire bulk of this episode to get to this point, but we're finally going to talk about what it means to breed bees and how I think through the process when I get to a point where I need to mutate to the next step. Well, there's a few things that you need to know beforehand that just are fundamental basics of breeding you to understand. Now, if you click on this forest princess and this water princess, and if you remember in the previous episode when I played the minigame in the escrotoire, I got a forest and water. It gets an increased chance of a common. That's why I'm using these two. If I do the forest things, I go over to the bee breeding, you'll see that there's a chance right here. That means there is a 15% chance when you use a forest princess and a meadows drone to get a common queen. 15% chance. Now, if you play the escrotoire, you'll get a boost in that, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe it goes to like 18 or 19%, so you get a couple percentage points, but that can really affect things if you are less than 10% or this is like a really low chance. Now, one thing you need to know is this: if it is red and in brackets, that means there are special requirements that must be completed. If you take a meadows princess and a forest drone and you are between March 29th and April 15th in real life, that means on the Gregorian calendar of the year 2024, March 29th to April 15th, you would then be able to breed the leporine queen. Now, this obviously is for St. Patrick's Day. The Mary Queen would be for Christmas between December 21st and December 27th. But be careful and read that if the brackets are in red, that there are specific requirements for specific bees, and they may not be just like, hey, you need it needs to be between a certain time frame. It can be things like it requires tin block as a foundation, or requires steel block, or requires arid humidity if you're talking about some of the nether bees. So make sure that you look at these numbers so you know exactly the requirements, or else you're just not going to get the mutation. The second thing that you need to understand is that when you have a bee like this forest bee, it's forest, and it has its traits here: fertility 3 times, and the flower type, pollination, production, lifespan, whatnot, and even the tolerance and the climate humidity here. When you breed it with another bee and another drone, as you can see, this one's lily pads. It's got the effect of water. It's different. When you breed it into like the common bee, will not carry over some of these stats, right? When when you make a crossbreed, it'll be like forest and water. If you're starting out in the early game, it may keep, the 3 times fertility here, but it'll have the 2 times fertility of the water drone, or vice versa. You may get the effect water here, but if you make a common drone out of it, or you get a common inactive trait, or you happen to just get a good chance and get the common queen, it'll have the base stats of the common bee itself. So it will not carry over the 3 times fertility. It'll breed into, when you breed it into the next bee cycle, it'll actually have the fertility and the lifespan of production of the bee that you're going for, the one that's coded into the game. So the only things that could carry over are effect, and then the numbers, the numbers here, up, down, 5, both 5, for the tolerance on both climate and humidity. These can also transfer over time as well, depending on how many iterations you do. But when you breed into that common for the first time, or whatever it happens to be, you will get the base stats of that common bee, and then you will have to breed in these traits later when you want to passive it, or when you want to use it again to breed. Now, let's talk about fertility for a second. 3 times fertility here on this means that when the queen is done, it'll make 3 drones as well as a princess. The higher fertility you have, the better chance you have to get the bee that you want. 1x fertility means it'll only ever produce 1 drone. You do not want to mutate or breed bees with 1x fertility. You want to at least have 2 times, and at best you want to have 4x fertility. In the next episode, I'll talk about making a breeder bee or a perfect stat bee that has all the requirements of stuff you want and that you can breed into the bee life cycle. But when you are starting out, you're not going to have access to that. So you need to be careful about what bees you use, and make sure that you are trying to get the best stats possible, so you get the most drones, so you can get the common or whatever it happens to be, and the pure one at that, to get the quest and to get the bee that you need in the easiest and the quickest way possible. Now, the other thing you should also know is that this is not a one-off process. This will take time. Breeding the bees together will actually take a significant amount of time. So if I put it in here, I'm going to turn on I have the Oblivion frame, and I put this in here and I turn this on, you'll see that I get a water princess. So it turned from the forest into the water. But if I look at the water and the forest, water forest, water forest, water common. So now there's the common, and that's the base stats for the common. Like I said, it breeds into the base stats of the common, while the stats of the water are there, and the forest. So now I want to get a common. Now you can do this however way you want. I personally like to keep the common on the side, and I say, okay, this is a water forest, this is a forest water. Now what if I go into a water and forest? What does it breed into? Do I get a water back, or do I, so I got a water, I got a water forest, and I got a water. So that's not what I wanted. Now if I take this water and a water common, you should be able to get a common bee out of it, because if you look at the Punnett square from biology, where you get the dominant and recessive, and you do the crossbreeding, you could kind of simulate and kind of assume what you might get if you keep doing these iterations. So I'm going to look at this common. It's not going to be pure. It could be, but in this case it wasn't. As you can see, it carried over the effect here, but the 3 times fertility of the forest stayed over here, but this is the base stats, and we got the lily pads here, and in here it only carried over the both 1. Now if I look at this common, it's also a common in water, and this is a water, so I want to breed these 2 commons together, and I get a water back. So as you can see, and I got to cultivate it, because that's the next bee in the line. Water common. So you can see that it's not an easy process. You'll have to keep going through the iterations one by one and hope that you get the bee that you want. As you can see now, it's too dry. It's normal damp. It's too dry for the bee to work in these conditions, meaning you have to put it in the Acclimitiser to then get it to get the bee be able to breed again in a position. Now, one thing I will say is that when you do create a bee and you have any princess, right? Let's say you have a princess. When you create a bee, you want to create multiple stacks of that drone. So the reason you want to create stacks of the same drone, so in the previous episode, I passived the forest bee just to get some combs. I started making a bunch of drones. The reason you want this is for 2 reasons. One, if you are crossbreeding and doing that perfect statting bee and adding whatever, sometimes, like we did here, you may lose the common part of the bee, right? This is a water now bee. There's no water in common. Only in this cultivated bee do we have the common trait anymore. So you want to make sure that you have kind of at least half a stack to a stack of that original drone when you first create a purebred, so that you can just breed it in from time to time, so that you can keep the bee, the active and inactive, for one of them at least having the bee that you're trying to get, in case you lose it along the way, because that can happen. You can lose it. Let's say you have a majestic bee as your breeder bee, which I'll show you how to do tomorrow or in the next video. My apologies. That bee can mix in with your water bee, and then you'll have water majestic water, and you'll keep getting water majestic, and then you get water. You get majestic, and then you're like, well, I want water back. So make sure you keep water drones so that you can throw it back in there. And while it may take a few extra steps to get the to get the perfect stats, breed it over, which I'll show you again in the next episode, it is going to be useful in case you do lose one of the active or inactive parts of the bee, the dominant and recessive, and you need to have that. The other reason you want to keep half a stack to a stack of a drone is because with a minimum of around 11 to 12 drones of a certain bee, you can actually change any princess into that bee. Now, if I put this mystical princess here and I put this forest drone here, and remember to keep track of your oblivion frame. See, now it already is a forest, but if I look at this forest, it's a forest and mystical, and it will not stack. These didn't stack at this forest drone. I put it back in here and I go in here. Look, now it's a common because those two bred together, but this common is a common and forest. Now if I put it back in here and I get a forest princess again, now it's forest, but it still doesn't have the same stats. So if with a minimum amount of 11 to 12 drones, you can actually turn any if I turn this on, actually you'll see that I can turn any princess into the same kind of bee, and it starts stacking. At some point, the three bees that come here, look, they start stacking, and now we have the same princess and the drone of that combination, where it once was a mystical bee. So you want to keep a stack of a bee that you get for when you breed a pure common or pure whatever. You want to keep at least a stack, half a stack to a stack of that drone, so you can always breed it into more princesses for more breeding later, or so you can make sure that you don't lose that certain species when you're trying to breed different stats on it. And of course, remember to repair your oblivion frames in your Thaumic Restore, or using the Essence Altar, whichever one you want to do, and that's basically the essentials of breeding. Now, like I said, I threw a lot of information at you in this episode. There's so much to learn about bees. There's so much to talk about, and I will continue to do so in the next few episodes. So the next episode, you should have your Apiarist suit, you should have your Industrious and your Imperial bees, because if you follow this method where you just kind of breed together and look at the bees and think, okay, I have a common and a cultivated, and I have a cultivated and a common. I want to get cultivated. Common, cultivated plus cultivated common means I should get at least one cultivated pure drone. Okay, now you mix in there. You get your cultivated pure drone. After you get your common pure drone, I'm going to keep half a stack of it. Now I'll go to the next one, cultivated into diligent. Now I have a diligent drone. Keep half a stack of that one. And as long as you have, the oblivion frame, or you don't even have to use the oblivion frame, you can just keep reiterating, and eventually you'll just create drones over time. So you want to go for the Industrious and Imperial bees first, and in the next episode we will get started by talking about the alveary and what the alveary does, how you can use the alveary, how you can passive the alveary, how you can use the alveary to make better mutations. We'll go a deep dive into the alveary, as well as I will also talk about a breeder bee. I personally use Majestic. That's the one I'm going to recommend to you guys, and that breeder bee is going to have the stats that we want on it, meaning we want it to have both 5 for climate, both 5 for humidity. We want it to have diurnal and nocturnal, so it works for the day. We want it to have tolerant flowers, so it works for the rain. We want it to have cave dwelling, so you can put it underground. We want it to have no effect. We want it to have longest, and we want it to have blinding speed. Of course, now that takes some time to get all of those stats breeded onto one breeder bee that you can put on other bees. So I'll show you how to start with something, and then go from there. You just keep building up and keep building up. Now, If any of this seems confusing, it is. Trust me, it took me a while to learn the bees. And when I first did it, I urge you to just watch this video a few times if you can't get it. And of course, if you have questions, please leave them down below in the comments, or hit me up when I'm live on Twitch at Aditya. I stream almost every day. I can answer your questions. I can help you with bees, and I'm more than willing to walk you through some steps when if I'm live. But if you have questions about what I talked about today, please let me know in the comments down below so that I can address them in the next video, or I can make or I can make a correction and reply to your comment about what the thought is. So let me know your guys' thoughts about this entire episode. Leave a like, subscribe. It really does help me out, and I appreciate it as I'm trying to do more content. Again, I'm really sorry for sounding nervous. I'm still trying to get used to this whole recording thing. The next episode is going to be amazing. We're going to talk about alvearies, and we're going to talk about that breeder bee, and we're going to get you right on the path to start making the best bees that you want. I really thank you guys for watching this video, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.